Hey guys, good evening or good morning, wherever you are tuning in from. Tonight, we're not just listening to stories, we're stepping through a silent doorway back to a time etched in iron and legend. So dim the lights, maybe light a candle if it feels right, or just let the soft hum of your surroundings lull you into this space. Find that perfect spot. Let your shoulders drop and gently close your eyes, or fix your gaze on something soft in the distance. Before we begin our whispered journey, take a moment. Breathe deeply. Let any lingering tensions from your day dissolve with each exhale. And if you feel so inclined, a gentle tap on the like button or a quiet subscribe helps these stories reach other weary travelers seeking a peaceful drift. But only if you truly feel a connection to what we're building here. Tonight, we open a window to one of history's most unyielding states, a name that echoes with discipline, resilience, and an almost brutal quest for glory, Sparta. We're going to journey through some of its lesser-known corners, peel back the layers of myth, and discover the deep truths that forge this extraordinary society. From the legendary stands at Thermopylae to the quiet corners of their daily lives, we'll uncover secrets that whisper across millennia. Let's begin our exploration by first revisiting one of its most famous tales. Asterisk, 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 you might have heard the legend, perhaps seen it on screen, the heroic stand of King Leonidas and his fabled 300 Spartans at the narrow mountain pass of Thermopylae. It's a story burned into the fabric of Western history. A defiant last breath against the overwhelming might of the Persian Empire. The image is vivid, a small, unyielding band of heavily armored warriors, bathed in the dust of battle, facing an ocean of invaders, refusing to yield. And indeed, the courage of those 300 was absolute, their sacrifice undeniable. They were, in every fiber of their being, Spartans. But here's one of the quiet truths of that legendary moment, often overlooked in the dramatic retelling. The pass was not held by the 300 alone. When King Leonidas chose to make his final desperate stand, understanding that retreat was no longer an option, and that the bulk of the Greek forces needed time to withdraw, he was not entirely forsaken. Alongside his elite Spartan guard, a fierce and devoted contingent, stood thousands of other brave Greek allies. There were the 700 soldiers from Thermopylae who steadfastly refused to leave, choosing to share the fate of the Spartans. There were the 400 Thebans, who, though some might argue their presence was less voluntary, were nevertheless part of that final desperate line. And before that, during the initial days of holding the pass, many more thousands of Phocians, Locrians, and other Greek city-states had fought valiantly before being ordered to withdraw. So, when we picture the iconic scene, imagine not just 300, but perhaps closer to 1,500 to 2,000 Greeks, all facing down the seemingly endless horde of Xerxes' army. The Spartans, however, were unique. They were the full citizen warrior set of Sparta, men who had undergone the brutal training of the Agoge since childhood. For them, retreat was not an option. Surrender was not a concept, their very identity. Their purpose was defined by this kind of ultimate sacrifice. They were men whose lives had been a singular preparation for a death in battle for their city, for their way of life. The decision to stay, to fight to the very last man, was not a rash one. It was a cold, calculated act of defiance, designed to buy precious time for the rest of Greece, and perhaps even more critically to send an unwavering message. a message that reverberated across the Greek world, and indeed, through history itself, that freedom was worth any price, and that true courage could make even the most insurmountable odds tremble. Their sacrifice, therefore, became a symbol, not just of Spartan valor, but of the collective Greek spirit of resistance. The legend of the 300 Spartans street-ending alone, though a simplification of the historical numbers, captured the footy essence of that moment. It was their absolute commitment, their predetermined death wish, and their unshakable discipline that turned a military defeat into an eternal victory of the human spirit. They knew they would die, yet they combed their long hair, polished their shields, and marched to their fate with a serenity that still chills the blood. They understood that sometimes a glorious death could be a more powerful weapon than any living army. And in doing so, they left us a story that, even now, reminds us of the profound strength found in unity and the enduring power of sacrifice. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Now, let's drift a little further into the Spartan warrior's world and consider an object often overlooked in the grandeur of their spears and swords, the shield. For a Spartan, a spear could be lost, a sword broken, and it would be a minor inconvenience, perhaps even a tale to tell. But the sumbi, the specie, that great, heavy, bronze-faced wooden shield, was an extension of their very soul, a symbol of their unbreakable bond, and its loss was an unforgivable stain, a mark of shame that could never be truly washed away. Imagine yourself, a young Spartan warrior, perhaps newly out of the Agoge, standing in the front ranks of the phalanx. The air is thick with anticipation. The rhythmic drumming of pipes is in your ears, a low, steady thrum that vibrates through your chest. Your shield, the cymbaspacy, is roughly 3 feet in diameter, a formidable circle of wood covered with a thin sheet of bronze, emblazoned perhaps with the lambda symbol, representing Laconia, the Spartan homeland. It is heavy, perhaps 15 to 20 pounds, and it rests on your left arm, secured by a central armband and a hand grip near the rim. Your left shoulder aches even before the battle begins from the sheer weight. But this shield isn't just about protecting Huinyu. That is the crucial difference. In the dense, interlocking formation of the phalanx, your shield protects not only your own body, but crucially, the exposed right side of the man standing to your immediate left. His shield, in turn, protects the man to soothe left, and so on, creating a solid moving wall of bronze and wood. Each man is a vital component, and each shield a brick in an impregnable fortress. To drop your spear in the heat of battle, perhaps you broke it, perhaps it slipped from your grasp. You can pick up another or draw your short sword. A momentary lapse, perhaps. But to drop your shield, to cast it aside in panic or fatigue, that is to tear a gaping hole in the very fabric of the phalanx. It is to expose your brother in arms, leaving him vulnerable to a thrust from the enemy, or worse, creating a breach that the enemy can exploit, unraveling the entire line. It was an act of profound betrayal, not just to yourself, but to the collective, to the sacred bond of the Spartan warrior. And so, when a Spartan mother bid farewell to her son going to war, she would not simply wish him luck. Her words would be chillingly precise, echoing the very core of Spartan values, either with your shield or on it. Think about the weight of those words, spoken with the calm certainty of a woman who had raised a warrior. With your shield meant victory, returning triumphant, carrying your shield as a symbol of your honor and your contribution to the collective. On it meant an honorable death in battle. A fallen Spartan warrior, if he died bravely, would be carried back from the battlefield on his own shield by his comrades. There was no other acceptable option. To return forn without twin your shield, having discarded it in flight, was to signify cowardice, dishonor, and an utter failure of your Spartan duty. It meant social ostracization, a life of profound shame stripped of your citizenship rights, a fate far worse than death. This simple object, the shield, encapsulated everything about Spartan society: the primacy of the collective over the individual, the unwavering demand for courage, the brutal logic of their military machine. It wasn't just a piece of equipment, it was the physical embodiment of their ethos, the unyielding promise they made to each other and to their city-state. Its weight was physical, but its true burden was the immense weight of honor, duty, and the very survival of Sparta. Asterisk, 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 as the sun begins its slow descent, let's turn our attention to another striking visual of the Spartan warrior, one that was both iconic and surprisingly highly practical: their distinctive red cloaks. The phanikis, as it was known, was a garment that immediately identified a Spartan soldier on the battlefield. You picture it, don't you? The deep crimson fabric, stark against the bronze of their helmets and shields, flowing behind them as they advanced. A vivid flash of color in the dusty chaos of battle. Now, many might assume this vibrant red was chosen purely for intimidation, a display of fierce confidence designed to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. And while it certainly had that effect, a disciplined line of red-clad warriors advancing in lockstep would undoubtedly be a terrifying sight. The primary reason, like so much in Sparta, was rooted in cold, calculated pragmatism. Imagine the battlefield, the clash of bronze on bronze, the shouts of men, the piercing calls of flutes, the dust kicked up by thousands of marching feet. It is a brutal, chaotic tableau, and in such a scene, blood would flow freely. Wounds would be inflicted and men would fall. In any army, the sight of one's comrades bleeding, collapsing, or being carried away could be deeply demoralizing. For new recruits, especially, the raw, visceral sight of blood dark, glistening against skin and fabric could trigger panic, shake their resolve, and potentially break the cohesion of the battle line. This is where the genius of the red cloak came into play. A deep red fabric has an astonishing property. It is remarkably effective at concealing the color of blood. A wound on a Spartan warrior, though painful and potentially fatal, would bleed into the crimson wool, and the bright, vivid stain that might cause panic or lower morale would simply blend in, becoming almost invisible to the casual eye. Think about the psychological impact. For the enemy, they might see men fall, but they wouldn't see the gruesome morale, sapping evidence of their blows. They wouldn't see the bright red splash that screams injury or death. Instead, they would see their red-clad opponents continue to advance, seemingly undeterred, their numbers apparently unbroken by the carnage. This could lead to a profound sense of despair and futility for the attackers, enhancing the myth of Spartan invincibility. And for the Spartans themselves, particularly the younger, less hardened warriors, it provided a subtle, yet crucial, psychological buffer. By minimizing the visible evidence of their own casualties, the red cloak helped maintain the illusion of unbroken strength. allowing them to focus on their training, their formation, and their duty, rather than being distracted or disheartened by the raw reality of their own injuries or those of their comrades. It was a silent, unsung piece of psychological warfare, played out on the very bodies of the warriors. So, while the red cloaks certainly added to the fearsome aura of the Spartans, their true value lay in this stark practical function, to obscure, to conceal, and ultimately, to maintain the unwavering discipline and morale of the deadliest fighting force in the ancient world. Every detail, every choice, even down to the color of their garments, served the singular purpose of creating the perfect warrior, the unyielding phalanx, and the seemingly unconquerable city-state. A calm, calculated choice, cloaked in a vibrant, unforgettable hue. Drifting now, let your thoughts settle upon the subtle, yet profound symbols that mark the Spartan warrior, even before the clash of shield and spear. A peculiar sight for many other Greeks, and perhaps for you too, would be the sight of a full-fledged Spartan warrior. Not the close-cropped, disciplined haircut you might instinctively picture when you hear the word military, but rather a cascading mane of meticulously tended long hair. This was not a fashion statement born of vanity, nor a cultural quirk without deeper meaning. Far from it. This distinctive coiffure, often braided or tied back, was a silent yet potent declaration of their elevated status within their own society. Imagine, if you will, the daily rituals. As the sun's first rays, still tentative and cool, touched the barracks, the Spartan warrior would rise. His morning wouldn't begin with a quick trim or a rough cut. Instead, his hands, calloused from sword and shield, would reach for fine-toothed combs, perhaps a vial of olive oil. A small luxury, yet a necessity for presentation. Each strand of hair would be painstakingly separated, untangled, smoothed, glistening under the pale morning light. This was a deliberate act, a meditative preparation. The rhythmic drag of the comb through the heavy locks, the faint scent of oil, the quiet focus on each movement. It was a moment of calm precision before a day of rigorous training or the brutal unpredictability of battle. Why such an investment of time and effort in something so seemingly frivolous for a warrior known for austerity? In the broader Hellenic world, short hair was often the mark of a slave, a laboring man, someone whose daily toil precluded the care of long tresses. Long hair, in contrast, was the prerogative of the free, the leisured, those who had servants or the luxury of time to maintain it. For the Spartan, whose entire life was dedicated to the art of war, the long hair underscored a fundamental truth of their society. They were sieved free from the mundane necessities of life. They did not farm, they did not build, they did not craft. These tasks were performed by the helots, the subjugated population that formed the very foundation of Sparta's peculiar social pyramid. The Spartan citizen was a warrior, and a warrior alone. His long hair was a visible testament to this unique societal compact, a stark visual contrast to the shorn heads of those who toiled for him. Consider the psychological impact both on the Spartan himself and on his adversaries. Before a battle, Plutarch describes the Spartan warriors, not in a frenzy of adrenaline, but in a state of serene calm, carefully combing their long hair. Picture the scene, the war horns already sounding, the thud of approaching armies growing louder, the air thick with tension. Yet, here are these men with steady hands, meticulously grooming themselves. This was not merely a practical act, but a profound ritual. It was their final adornment, their last act of self-possession before stepping into the chaos. Like a bride preparing for her ceremony, these warriors were preparing for their ultimate test, their potential death. This quiet, almost meditative act of grooming suggested an unnerving composure, a complete absence of fear. To an enemy, seeing a phalanx of these red-cloaked, long-haired warriors advancing, moving with a disciplined, almost unnatural calm, could be deeply disquieting. It projected an image of men utterly resigned to their fate, fearless, even elegant in their approach to violence. The flowing hair, far from being an impediment, became part of this terrifying tableau, a symbol of their unwavering resolve and aristocratic warrior pride. It was a sign that these were men of a different order, men for whom battle was not an ordeal to be feared, but a stage upon which their carefully cultivated virtue was to be displayed. And as you feel this image settle into your mind, the rhythmic brush of the comb, the subtle glint of light on well-oiled hair, let it guide you deeper into the ancient quiet. Just as their physical appearance spoke volumes, so too did their spoken words. Spartans were renowned for their distinct way of speaking, concise, direct, and often startlingly blunt. This linguistic style was so characteristic of them that it acquired its own name. Laconic, derived from Laconia, the region in which Sparta was located. It wasn't merely a preference, it was a deeply ingrained cultural value, a reflection of their austere, no-nonsense ethos. Imagine the verbose, often flowery rhetoric common in other Greek city-states, particularly Athens. Debates in the Ara, lengthy philosophical treatises, elaborate speeches designed to persuade or impress. These were anathema to the Spartan spirit. For them, words were tools meant to convey meaning with maximum efficiency and minimal embellishment. Unnecessary syllables were shed, polite pleasantries were deemed superfluous, and emotional appeals were viewed with suspicion. What mattered was the core message delivered with the stark precision of a spear thrust. The most famous anecdote illustrating this laconic art involves Philip II of Macedon, father of Alexander the Great, as his armies swept across Greece, conquering city state after city-state. Philip, in a display of his growing power, sent a message to the Spartans. His threat was clear, his words heavy with menace. If I invade your land, I will lay waste your farms, slay your people, and raze your city to the ground. You will be nothing but dust. The message was long detailed and intended to instill absolute terror. The Spartans, receiving this message, did not convene a lengthy debate. They did not send back a delegation to negotiate. Their response was not a scroll filled with counter-threats or pleas. Instead, they dispatched a single word carved or inscribed with a simplicity that belied its immense power. The word was, if. Just that. Consider the audacious confidence, the unflinching defiance packed into those two letters. It dismissed Philip's entire verbose threat with a dismissive wave. It implied that his invasion was not a foregone conclusion, that his destructive power was contingent upon his ability to even Suviantiantori, their territory. It conveyed contempt for his bluster and an unwavering belief in their own military prowess. To an outside observer, it might seem arrogant, but to a Spartan, it was simply the truth, expressed without a single wasted breath. This wasn't an isolated incident. Spartan wit, though rarely expressed, was often sharp, honed by a lifetime of rigorous self-control and an almost brutal honesty. When an Athenian once mocked the Spartans for their short swords, a Spartan retorted without missing a beat, "But they are long enough to reach your heart." The directness was chilling, the message clear and without ambiguity. There was no need for grand pronouncements about courage or skill. The implication was enough. The quiet discipline of their language reflected the quiet discipline of their lives. In a society where actions spoke far louder than words, the spoken word became an extension of that action, focused, purposeful, and without excess. A laconic answer didn't invite further discussion. It often ended it. It left no room for misunderstanding, only for stark acceptance of its meaning. It was language distilled to its most potent form, a weapon in itself, designed to cut through noise and deliver undeniable truth. And as you consider the powerful brevity of these words, the silence that follows such a concise statement, let it invite a similar quiet within your own thoughts, a peaceful emptying of all but the most essential. This Spartan way of being, of speaking, of fighting was not innate. It was forged meticulously and mercilessly, from the earliest age through a system known simply as the Thermopylae Agoge. This was no ordinary school. It was a crucible, a relentless, all-encompassing training regimen that shaped every male citizen from childhood into the ultimate warrior. From the tender age of 7, a Spartan boy's life as an individual ceased, and his life as a soldier of the collective began. Picture a 7-year-old perhaps still clinging to the last vestiges of childhood innocence, being plucked from his mother's side. There were no emotional goodbyes, no lingering hugs. Such displays of sentiment were discouraged, deemed weaknesses that would hinder the boy's transformation. He would be stripped of his fine tunics, of any personal possessions, and immersed into a communal barracks, a world of stark simplicity and brutal uniformity. This was his new family, his new home, a place of hard earth and colder stone. Life in the 40 Agoge was a constant lesson in deprivation and endurance. The food rations were intentionally meager, designed to keep the boys perpetually hungry. This wasn't merely about toughening them up physically. It was about cultivating cunning and self-reliance. If a boy wanted more to eat, he was encouraged to steal, not from his fellow trainees, but from the surrounding countryside, from the helot farms, or even from the communal kitchens. The key, however, was not the act of stealing itself, but the secoli with which it was executed. If a boy was caught, he wasn't punished for theft, but for his incompetence for getting caught. The whip, a constant companion in the Agoge, would be applied with ruthless efficiency, teaching him a painful lesson in stealth and discretion. Imagine the constant gnawing hunger, the sharpened senses, the quick furtive glances, the quiet rustle in the night as a young boy, fueled by desperation, learned to move like a shadow to evade detection. Their clothing was minimal, often just a single rough cloak worn year-round regardless of the scorching Laconian summer or the biting winter winds. Shoes were a luxury almost unheard of. The boys walked barefoot, their feet toughening into leathery pads, impervious to thorns and rough terrain. Their beds were often nothing more than reeds gathered from the Eurotas River, broken by hand and laid out on the hard ground. Imagine the chill of the night seeping into your bones, the prickly discomfort of the reeds, the constant awareness of your own vulnerability to the elements. There was no softness, no warmth of a feather bed, no solace in personal comfort. The physical training was relentless. Running, wrestling, jumping, mock combat with wooden swords and shields. These were the daily rhythms. Older boys, often teenagers, acted as mentors and taskmasters, their authority absolute. The younger boys learned obedience, deference, and how to take a beating without a whimper. Pain was not to be expressed, tears were not to be shed. To complain was to show weakness, an unforgivable flaw in the Spartan system. Imagine the constant ache in your muscles, the sting of scrapes and bruises, the raw chafing of your skin, and the silent iron resolve to betray, none of it with a sound. Beyond physical prowess, the Agoge cultivated a mental fortitude, an unwavering loyalty to the collective. Individuality was systematically crushed. Boys were taught to speak concisely, to value action over words, and to view themselves not as distinct persons, but as interchangeable cogs in the magnificent Spartan war machine. They learned to sing warlike songs, not for entertainment, but for discipline and cohesion, for marching in lockstep. They heard tales of Spartan heroes, of courage and sacrifice, shaping their aspirations towards a singular ideal, to be the finest warrior, to die gloriously for Sparta. This rigorous education continued for years, evolving as the boys grew into young men. It culminated in the Forticryptia, a secret and terrifying test of survival and suppression, where chosen youths were sent into the wilderness with nothing, tasked with hunting and killing the most rebellious helots under the cloak of night. A grim final lesson is ruthlessness and absolute control. The Agoge was more than just military training. It was a total immersion, a complete re-engineering of the human spirit. It stripped away all personal desire, all fear, all softness, leaving behind only the hardened core of a Spartan citizen, a perfectly obedient, fiercely loyal, and terrifyingly effective warrior, ready to face any foe, endure any hardship, and make the ultimate sacrifice for his city. The silent, rhythmic cadence of their training, the stark simplicity of their lives, the quiet gnawing of hunger, the constant physical demand. Let these sensations, remote and ancient, cradle your awareness as you sink deeper into the quietude of this historical journey. The first light of day, or perhaps the flickering oil lamp beside you, brings a thought, a distant echo from a time when life's very beginning was subjected to the harshest of judgments. Close your eyes and imagine that quiet, ancient whisper. There is a persistent, chilling legend that tells of Spartan newborns, deemed weak or imperfect, being cruelly cast from the precipitous heights of Mount Taygetus. It's a vivid, brutal image that has long defined the Spartan reputation for ruthlessness. But the truth, while still stark and cold, was perhaps less theatrical, yet equally unforgiving. It speaks volumes about a society that prized strength and utility above all else, even the nascent spark of life. When a Spartan child entered the world, its fate was not immediately in the hands of its parents. Instead, an assembly of tribal elders, a council of the wisest and most experienced men would convene. Their purpose was not to celebrate a new life, but to meticulously inspect it. Picture them now, gathered in a dimly lit chamber, perhaps near the Saivalesha, the public meeting hall, or even in a secluded part of the Agoge grounds, their faces stern and unyielding. They would examine the infant with a practiced eye, searching for any sign of physical deformity, weakness, or illness. Each limb, each feature, every subtle indication of vitality or frailty would be assessed against the unyielding standard of Spartan fitness. The infant lay vulnerable, perhaps swaddled tightly, its small cries muffled, or its tiny breaths barely stirring the still air. The elders, their expressions inscrutable, would touch and observe, their decision carrying the weight of the entire polis. There was no sentimentality in their gaze, no room for the gentle affections that typically greet a newborn. This was not a moment for joy or tenderness, but for cold, calculated assessment. Was this new life a potential asset, a future shield, bearer, a mother of warriors? Or was it a potential burden, a drain on the community's precious resources, a weakness in the formidable chain of Spartan strength? Those infants deemed strong and robust, fit to endure the rigors of the Agoge and contribute to the collective might of Sparta, were permitted to live. They were returned to their mothers, their survival a testament to their inherent vitality and the elders' approval. But for those found wanting, the path diverged into a silent, terrible oblivion. The legend of being thrown from the mountain was, in all likelihood, an exaggeration designed to terrify and impress upon outsiders the severity of Spartan discipline. The grim reality was that these children judged unfit were almost certainly abandoned. Imagine the journey, not a violent toss, but a quiet, somber procession. The infant, perhaps still swaddled, perhaps simply placed in a crude basket, would be carried away, not to the jagged peaks, but to the foot of Mount Taygetus, to some desolate ravine or secluded hollow. There, in the unforgiving embrace of nature, it would be left to the elements, to exposure, to hunger, or to the wild creatures that roam the rugged landscape. The cold, unblinking stars would be its last witnesses. No ceremony, no final rites, just the stark reality of being deemed unworthy in a society where weakness was a crime. This was Sparta's brutal brand of eugenics, a cold, calculated strategy to ensure that every citizen, from the moment of birth, was a potential asset. There was no room for the infirm, the delicate, or the less than perfect. Every life had to justify its existence in terms of its contribution to the city, state's military prowess and self-sufficiency. It was a practice rooted in the existential fear of internal weakness and external threat, a testament to a people so dedicated to survival that even the most fundamental human bond, soothe, that between parent and child soothe, was subordinate to the needs of the state. So, as you drift further, let the distant chill of that ancient judgment settle, a reminder of a world where existence itself was a privilege earned through strength. Asterisk, 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 as the scent of dawn or the quiet hum of your room settles around you. Let us continue our journey into the world of a Spartan boy, a path defined by unwavering discipline and a curious, deliberate scarcity. If you were one of those deemed worthy to live, your earliest years with your family would be short, a mere prelude to a life that truly began at the age of 7. This was when the Agoge, the rigorous state-sponsored education and training system, would claim you. Imagine yourself as a 7-year-old boy leaving the warmth and familiarity of your home, stepping into a world of bare stone barracks and stern instructors. The Agoge was not a school in the sense you know it, filled with books and gentle lessons. It was a crucible designed to forge warriors, to strip away individual weakness and instill collective strength. And one of its most peculiar, yet fundamental, lessons involved hunger. Your food rations in the Agoge were intentionally, brutally insufficient. not merely meager, but designed to leave you with a constant, gnawing emptiness in your stomach, a perpetual ache that permeated your days and haunted your nights. Perhaps it was a small bowl of sumbalas zomasi, the notorious black broth tevi, a thick, dark concoction of boiled pig's blood, salt and vinegar, notoriously unpalatable even to the hardened Spartan. Or perhaps a small portion of barley cake, hard and dry, barely enough to sustain a rapidly growing boy. This wasn't accidental deprivation, it was a deliberate pedagogical strategy. You would spend your days training, running, wrestling, and enduring physical hardship, all on an empty stomach. The hunger would sharpen your senses, heighten your awareness. Every scent of food, every glimpse of a hidden store would become an intense preoccupation. This chronic hunger was designed to cultivate something vital, not obedience, but resourcefulness. You were not simply expected to endure the hunger, you were encouraged to alleviate it through stealth. Theft then became a compulsory subject, a twisted form of martial arts. Picture yourself, a young boy, eyes darting, heart pounding as you plotted. Where might you find an unguarded loaf of bread, a stray piece of cheese, perhaps a farmer's field at the edge of the barracks, offering a few precious vegetables or fruits? The goal wasn't just to steal food, but to steal it, Haikadide. Success was rewarded with a full stomach, however fleetingly. Failure, however, brought a far harsher lesson than simple hunger. If you were caught, the punishment wasn't for the act of stealing itself, for that was encouraged. No, the punishment was for your clumsiness, your severe failure to be cunning, swift, and invisible. Imagine the sting of the whip across your back administered by an instructor whose face betrayed no emotion, only disappointment in your lack of skill. The pain wasn't just physical, it was a lesson burned into your very being. Fun never be caught it. This brutal pedagogy served multiple purposes. It taught you how to survive when supplies were scarce, a crucial skill for any soldier operating behind enemy lines or during a prolonged siege. It honed your senses, training you to observe, to anticipate, to move silently and swiftly. It cultivated cunning and deception, qualities that might seem ignoble, but were invaluable in warfare, where trickery could turn the tide of battle. It also built resilience, a capacity to endure pain and humiliation without breaking, to learn from your mistakes and become more astute. The Agoge instilled a deep appreciation for the value of food, for its procurement was a daily struggle, a testament to your own ingenuity. It fostered a sense of camaraderie among the boys, as they might collaborate on a daring raid or share the spoils of a successful theft. This wasn't about teaching boys to be criminals. It was about teaching them to be survivors, capable of adapting to any situation, to be the most dangerous kind of warrior, fruity one who could live off the land, move unseen, and strike without warning. The subtle pangs of hunger you might feel now, a gentle reminder of your own body, pale in comparison to the constant, deliberate emptiness that defined the youth of a Spartan. Asterisk, 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 as the echoes of the Agoge begin to fade. Let us transition to a cornerstone of adult Spartan life, a ritual as fundamental to their society as their shields were to their phalanx. This was the Sisisisha, the public mess hall, a place where all adult male citizens, the foodie homoioi, or equals, came together not just to eat, but to reaffirm their very existence as Spartans. Imagine the scene: a long, austere hall, perhaps with rough wooden tables and benches, devoid of any luxury or adornment. The air would be filled with the murmur of low conversations, the clatter of simple bowls, and the constant, underlying hum of collective masculine presence. This was not a noisy, boisterous feast, but a disciplined gathering, a daily affirmation of communal life. Each syssitia was typically composed of about 15 men, a tight-knit group that shared meals, discussed current affairs, and forged unbreakable bonds of brotherhood. Membership was not optional. It was a mandatory requirement for every Spartan male citizen. From the moment you completed the Agoge and became an adult, you were expected to join a syssitia and contribute your share. And this contribution was critical. Each member was required to provide a fixed amount of provisions every month. Picture it: a bushel of barley meal, a certain measure of wine, some cheese, figs, perhaps a small piece of meat for special occasions. These weren't luxurious items, but the staples that sustained life. This monthly contribution was not a simple fee. It was the physical manifestation of your commitment to the collective, a tangible demonstration of your worth and your ability to pull your weight within the communal structure. The food itself would be simple, hearty, and designed for sustenance, not pleasure. The famous black broth, Vermelisomosis, would likely make a regular appearance alongside barley bread and perhaps some seasonal vegetables or olives. There were no individual choices, no special orders. Everyone ate the same, further reinforcing the principle of equality among the citizens. This shared experience of simple fare was a deliberate antidote to luxury and private wealth, ensuring that no man could ostentatiously display his riches through his diet. The syssitia was more than just a place to satisfy hunger. It was the heart of Spartan social and political life. It was where young men learned from their elders, where military tactics were discussed, where reputations were made or broken. The bonds forged over these daily meals were deeper than mere friendship. They were the ties that held the Spartan phalanx together, the absolute trust that allowed men to stand shoulder to shoulder in battle, protecting the man to their left with their own shield. But this system, designed to foster equality and unity, carried a fearsome shadow. The consequence of failing to provide your monthly contribution was catastrophic. Imagine the quiet dread that would creep in if your harvest was poor, or if some misfortune befell your property. If you could not bring your required share, if your personal wealth or capacity failed to meet the collective demand, you would be downgraded. This wasn't a temporary demotion. It meant losing your citizenship, your status as a fourniois. To be stripped of citizenship in Sparta was to suffer a social death, a fall from grace more terrifying than any physical injury. You would no longer be permitted to dine in the syssitia, no longer allowed to participate in the assembly, no longer considered an equal. You would become an outcast, a hypomean tive, one of the inferiors, shunned and humiliated. Your life's purpose, your very identity shattered. Imagine the profound shame, the utter despair of being relegated to the fringes of a society that defined itself by collective belonging and martial prowess. This harsh reality meant that every Spartan lived with a constant pressure, a quiet anxiety to maintain their contribution, to ensure their economic viability. It was a powerful disincentive against extravagance or idleness, a constant reminder that citizenship was a privilege, not an inherent right, and that it had to be continually earned through your contribution to the common good. So, as you listen to the soft cadences of this story, Consider the profound implications of those communal meals. They were the very sinews of Spartan society, a daily testament to their rigid social contract. They fostered an unparalleled camaraderie and sense of unity, yet simultaneously created an immense pressure, a terrifying consequence for any individual who could not, or would not, pull their weight. This was the Spartan way, a life lived entirely for the state, from the first breath to the last, where even the simple act of eating was imbued with deep political and social significance. Far removed from the bustling markets and secluded women's quarters of other Greek city-states, the women of Sparta cultivated a life utterly astonishing in its freedom and influence. While an Athenian woman might spend her days veiled and confined, weaving tapestries and managing the inner sanctum of the home, a Spartan woman walked with a different stride, both literally and figuratively. From girlhood, her path was intertwined with the strength and future of the Thermopylae. Imagine the crisp morning air, the sun just warming the rugged Laconian landscape. You might witness young Spartan girls, not with spindles or looms, but on the communal training grounds. Here, they were not merely onlookers, but active participants. They ran, they wrestled, they threw javelins and discus, their movements strong, their bodies toned by deliberate exercise. This was a radical departure from the norm. While other Greek women were encouraged to be pale and delicate, the Spartan ideal was robust health, muscularity, and an unyielding spirit. Sometimes they even trained in the nude, a practice that would have scandalized the rest of the Hellenic world. Yet for Spartans it was simply practical, a testament to their unwavering focus on physical excellence without pretense. They were not training to be warriors themselves in the traditional sense, but their bodies were temples, carefully maintained to produce the next generation of unshakable Spartan soldiers. This physical freedom was mirrored by a remarkable intellectual and social independence. Unlike their Athenian counterparts, Spartan women were educated, not necessarily in the intricacies of philosophy or poetry, but in practical knowledge and the history of their people, and in the values of the state, duty, discipline, and absolute loyalty. Their voices carried weight within their households, often exceeding that of their husbands who were, after all, permanently tied to the syssitia and the rhythms of military life. While men were largely absent, immersed in the rigorous demands of the Agoge and the barracks, Spartan women became the undisputed masters of the domestic sphere. They managed estates, oversaw the Hellenic workforce, and held significant economic power. Indeed, they could own and inherit property, a privilege almost unheard of elsewhere. It is estimated that by the 4th century BCE, Spartan women controlled a substantial portion, perhaps even as much as 25ths, of all Laconian land. This wasn't a mere concession, it was a deliberate philosophical choice. The Spartans believed implicitly that only strong, intelligent, and free-thinking mothers could produce the kind of unwavering, disciplined warriors their society required. A frail, ignorant mother, they reasoned, would birth weak children. Thus, the Spartan woman was not just a wife or a mother. She was a vital, respected pillar of the state, her autonomy intrinsically linked to the city's survival. Their famous retort to a foreign woman who mocked them for being the only women who could rule Menhandau. Because we are the only women who give birth to men, encapsulates this fierce pride and purpose. They were the cultivators of courage, the guardians of the Spartan spirit, shaping not just bodies but the very soul of the city, one formidable sun at a time. This elevated status, however, came with its own heavy burden, the constant expectation of delivering perfect, unyielding citizens ready to sacrifice everything for Sparta. As the quiet darkness settles around you, let your thoughts drift towards the peculiar rituals that mark the beginning of a Spartan union, a stark contrast to the freedoms enjoyed by the women in their daily lives. Marriage in Sparta was less about romantic courtship and more about a clandestine act, a ritualized kidnapping designed to strengthen the state and perpetuate the warrior lineage, all while upholding the relentless demands of the Agoge. Imagine the day of your wedding if you were a young Spartan bride. There would be no elaborate procession, no vibrant feasting with flowing wine and joyous music. Instead, you would be taken perhaps by a trusted female friend or relative to a quiet, darkened room. The first step of this peculiar ceremony involved the symbolic shedding of your maidenhood, not through a change of dress, but by the barber's shears. Your hair would be shorn short, almost like a man's, a deliberate act to blur the lines of gender identity, at least for this solitary ritual. Then you would shed your conventional female garments, whatever modest tunics or cloaks you might wear, and be dressed in men's clothing, perhaps a rough tunic, a heavy cloak, trousers if any were worn fundy, the attire of a young man. Alone in the dimness, lying on a straw mat or a simple bed, you would wait. The air would be still, perhaps carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from a distant hearth, or the cool, damp earth from outside. Meanwhile, the groom, who was likely a full-fledged warrior by this point, would be engaged in his usual duties at the syssisha, the communal mess hall. He would finish his meal, engage in the usual banter and discussions, maintaining the facade of his routine. Then, under the cloak of night, when the city was quiet and the stars began to emerge, he would slip away, his mission, to find his waiting bride. This was a symbolic abduction, a brief, hushed encounter in the darkness. He would join her in her darkened room, a fleeting moment of intimacy before the sun hinted at dawn. For these newly married couples, life was far from the domestic bliss imagined in other societies. The groom was still bound by the strictures of the Agoge and communal living. He did not move in with his new wife. Instead, he would continue to reside in the barracks with his fellow soldiers. Conjugal visits were strictly nocturnal, secret affairs. Each night he would have to sneak away from his comrades, steal through the quiet streets and secretly visit his wife, only to return to his barracks before daybreak, before the morning reveille sounded. This practice continued for weeks, months, sometimes even years, until perhaps his first child was born, or he reached a certain age or distinction. The purpose of this secrecy and delay was multifaceted. It maintained the warrior's focus on his comrades and his duties, fostered a sense of longing that some believed made children stronger, and ensured that the bonds of the syssisha remained paramount even over the ties of family. The whispers of the wind outside, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, these would be the silent witnesses to these furtive marital encounters, a strange blend of duty, devotion, and almost childlike secrecy. Beneath the grand pronouncements of discipline and the unyielding facade of the Spartan state lay a profound and inescapable truth. Its very existence, its unique social and military structure, was built upon the subjugation of a vast and resentful underclass. These were the Helots, a people far outnumbering the full Spartan citizens, whose labor made the Spartan way of life possible, and whose potential for rebellion was the city-state's constant, gnawing nightmare. Imagine the fertile plains of Messenia, a region conquered by Sparta centuries before the events we've discussed. It was here that the majority of the Helots toiled, bound to the land, their lives a perpetual cycle of agricultural labor. They were not chattel slaves, bought and sold individually like property, but rather state-owned serfs, tied to specific plots of land and assigned to individual Spartan households. They cultivated the fields of barley and wheat, harvested the olives from ancient groves, tended the flocks of sheep and goats, and performed all the arduous physical tasks that a Spartan citizen, dedicated to military training and public life, would consider beneath him. Their existence was one of constant surveillance and casual brutality. They had no rights, no voice, and their lives were lived under the shadow of Spartan fear. Spartans would often mock them, force them into degrading acts, or even get them drunk publicly to demonstrate to their young citizens the perceived dangers of excess. The very air they breathed was charged with unspoken tension, a delicate balance maintained by overwhelming military force. The sheer numerical disparity between Spartans and Helots was staggering. For every free Spartan citizen, there might have been 7, 10, or even more Helots. This vast imbalance created a state of perpetual alert for the Spartans. Every drill, every maneuver, every harsh lesson in the Agoge, every sacrifice of individual comfort theward, all were ultimately geared towards one overarching objective: to maintain absolute control over the Helots. The Spartan military machine, arguably the most efficient and feared of the ancient world, was not primarily designed to conquer external enemies, but to crush internal dissent. So, while the Spartan citizen dedicated his life to honing his body into an unbreakable weapon, knowing he might face the formidable hoplites of Athens or Thebes, his immediate, ever-present enemy was often found closer to home, in the fields and villages surrounding his city. The gentle rustle of the wind through the olive trees could mask the murmur of discontent. The distant smoke from a cooking fire could signal a clandestine meeting. The Spartans lived in a permanent state of low-grade war with their own labor force. This constant threat, this foundational fear, shaped every aspect of their society, from their austere lifestyle to their unwavering adherence to militarism. It was the Helots who watered the Spartan fields, but their silent resentment watered the roots of Sparta's unique and ultimately unsustainable power. The Spartan political landscape was as unique as its social structure, a fascinating blend of ancient traditions and ingenious checks and balances. Unlike the singular monarchs of many ancient kingdoms, or the burgeoning democracies of other Greek city-states, Sparta chose to walk a different path. It was a path defined by a peculiar institution, the dual monarchy. Imagine a city-state governed not by one king, but by two, reigning simultaneously. These weren't co-regents in the modern sense, sharing a throne as equals, but rather two distinct lines of royal descent, the Agads and the Eurypontids, each claiming an ancestry stretching back to the mythical Heracles himself. From the very dawn of Spartan history, this dual kingship was the bedrock of their governmental design, born perhaps from an ancient compromise between two powerful families, or as a deliberate safeguard against the tyrannical impulses that so often plagued other city-states. It was a system designed for stability, for power diffusion, for preventing any single individual from accumulating enough authority to bend the entire city. state to their sole will. One king would traditionally lead the army on campaign, a testament to Sparta's martial ethos, while the other remained in the city, attending to domestic affairs, guiding the daily rhythms of civic life. This ensured that even when the might of Sparta was arrayed on a distant battlefield, the heart of the city continued to beat with a steady royal pulse. Yet, this arrangement was far from an absolute monarchy, even with two crowns. The kings of Sparta were not supreme rulers in the vein of a Persian Shah or an Egyptian pharaoh. Their power, though substantial, was meticulously circumscribed by a complex web of other institutions. They were members, yes, but not masters, of the Gerousia, the Council of Elders, a venerable body composed of 28 men over the age of 60, who, along with the two kings, held immense legislative and judicial authority. Imagine the hushed, resonant debates within that chamber, the weight of centuries of tradition pressing upon every decision, the slow, deliberate pace of consensus, building among men whose lives had been dedicated to the preservation of the Spartan way. But even more potent were the ephors, 5 elected overseers who held truly extraordinary power, capable of holding the kings themselves accountable. Each year, from among the body of ordinary citizens, 5 ephors were chosen, their role to supervise not just the kings, but every aspect of Spartan life. They presided over the Gerousia, summoned the Apella, assembly of all male citizen society, and even possessed the unique authority to impeach a king. Picture the scene: a proud Spartan king, descendant of gods, standing before these 5 annually elected officials, subjected to their scrutiny, their judgments. It was a potent symbol of how deeply embedded the principle of accountability was within Spartan society. A stark reminder that even divine lineage did not grant immunity from the laws and customs of the city. This intricate tapestry of shinered power, of checks and balances, was intended to be Sparta's bulwark against internal strife, a mechanism to ensure that no single ambition could ever overwhelm the collective will. However, like any complex machine, it was not without its friction. The dual kingship, while preventing absolute tyranny, often led to political infighting, a subtle, sometimes overt, rivalry between the two royal houses. Imagine the whispered accusations, the political maneuvering, the way each king might attempt to subtly undermine the other, or to curry favor with the ephors or the Gerousia. This inherent tension, though often contained, could occasionally flare up, creating delays in decision, making complicating foreign policy, and at times even paralyzing the city's ability to respond swiftly to crisis. When one king led the army to war, the other's counsel was crucial but still subject to the larger political currents back home. Messengers would travel with critical reports, strategies would be debated, and the authority of the absent king might be questioned by the ephors or the remaining monarch. It was a system that valued caution over speed, tradition over innovation, a reflection of a society that prized stability above all else, even if it meant moving with the deliberate pace of an ancient glacier. The dual monarchy was a testament to Sparta's unique genius for self-governance, a testament to its commitment to preventing the excesses of individual power. But it was also a system that, in its very design, harbored the seeds of its own occasional paralysis, a slow, methodical heartbeat for a city that often needed to move with the speed of a warrior's blade. The weight of tradition, the intricate dance of power, it all contributed to the deep, almost palpable sense of ancient order that permeated every facet of Spartan existence. as the sun cast long shadows across the rugged Peloponnesian landscape. Sparta stood apart, not just geographically, but philosophically. This was a nation that consciously chose a path divergent from its Greek neighbors, particularly in its approach to wealth and commerce. While Athens gloried in its silver mines and bustling trade, becoming a beacon of economic prosperity, Sparta deliberately turned its back on the lures of material riches. It was a decision famously attributed to the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus, whose reforms, whether real or mythical, shaped the very soul of the city. Lycurgus, so the story goes, understood the corrosive power of greed, the way that the pursuit of wealth could unravel the social fabric, corrupt the warrior spirit, and distract citizens from their primary duty, service to the state. His solution was radical, almost revolutionary for its time. He decreed that Sparta would not use gold or silver coinage, the universal medium of exchange in the ancient world. Instead, the Spartans would transact using something far more cumbersome, far less desirable: huge, heavy, clumsy iron bars, known as pelliners. Imagine these coins in your mind's eye. Not neatly minted discs, but raw, unwieldy chunks of iron, perhaps oxidized, dull and cold to the touch. They would have been impossibly difficult to carry in any significant quantity, a small purchase requiring a considerable effort just to transport the payment. A simple market transaction, if such things even existed in the Spartan sense, would become an arduous physical task. To accumulate any significant amount of wealth would mean needing a storage space akin to a small barn, groaning under the immense weight of these metallic rods. The clang of these bars, heavy and resonant, would have been the only sound of currency changing hands in Sparta, a stark contrast to the jingle of silver drachmas in Athens. This unique monetary system was a masterful piece of social engineering. By making wealth accumulation virtually impossible and entirely impractical, Lycurgus effectively removed the primary incentive for luxury, for trade, and for the kind of individualistic pursuit of profit that characterized other city-states. Why strive for more when more meant only more physical burden, more rust, more unwieldy metal taking up space? The very act of possessing these pelliners made them undesirable, a tangible embodiment of Lycurgus's intent. The practical effect was profound. Sparta became economically isolated, a self-sufficient military machine. Its citizens were discouraged from engaging in foreign trade, as their money was worthless outside their borders, and foreign goods, often deemed frivolous or corrupting, were difficult to acquire. This economic insularity reinforced their austere lifestyle, their focus on military training, and their communal ethos. It was a society where a man's worth was not measured by the size of his coffers, but by the strength of his shield arm, the sharpness of his wit, and the depth of his devotion to the common good. In this context, the idea of a poor Spartan was not one of shame, but simply a fact of communal living. Everyone, from the kings to the humblest citizen, was expected to contribute to the common messes, the Syssitia with their share of foodstuffs. The iron currency ensured that no one could use accumulated wealth to buy their way out of this communal obligation, or to flaunt a lifestyle that deviated from the austere norm. It fostered a radical equality among citizens, at least in terms of material possessions, binding them together in a shared commitment to simplicity and military discipline. Of course, this rejection of conventional money did not entirely eliminate the need for resources. Sparta still acquired what it needed through tribute from its conquered territories, particularly from the Helots, who provided the agricultural backbone of the state. And when dealing with foreign powers, particularly for military purposes, Sparta would occasionally use actual gold and silver, often provided by allies or extracted as spoils of war. But these precious metals were carefully controlled, handled by the state, and never permitted to circulate freely among the citizenry. The message was clear: gold and silver were tools for power abroad, not instruments for corruption at home. The clang of those heavy iron bars, the sheer physical effort required for any transaction, served as a constant, tangible reminder of Sparta's unique values. It was a daily sermon against materialism, a silent, weighty testament to a society that deliberately chose the path of honor over opulence, discipline over indulgence. This was Sparta, a nation that built its very foundations on the deliberate rejection of the glittering allure of gold, finding its true wealth in the unyielding spirit of its warriors and the unshakable unity of its citizens. The very strength that allowed Sparta to carve out its unique place in the ancient world. Its fierce dedication to discipline and its unwavering focus on military excellence also bred a profound and ultimately debilitating suspicion of anything external. Sparta was an intensely insular society, almost pathologically afraid of outside influences. This fear manifested in a policy known as sevenelegiona, the expulsion of foreigners. It was a deliberate, systematic attempt to seal off the city from the rest of the Greek world, to create a cultural vacuum where the rigorous Lycurgan system could flourish untainted. Imagine the atmosphere: a city almost deliberately unwelcoming, its borders guarded not just by soldiers, but by an invisible wall of cultural suspicion. Foreigners, known as perioikoi or visitors from other city-states, were often viewed with a wary eye. While some trade and necessary diplomatic exchanges did occur, their presence within the heart of Sparta was strictly regulated and frequently restricted. They were seen as potential carriers of subversive ideas, of decadent luxuries, of effeminate customs that could erode the very foundations of Spartan austerity and martial virtue. The fear was that a casual conversation, a new song, a foreign fashion, could somehow chip away at the rigid structure that held Spartan society together. This policy wasn't merely about keeping foreigners out. It was also about keeping Spartans in. Citizens were generally forbidden from traveling abroad without explicit permission. To leave Sparta was to risk exposure to the wider world, to encounter different political systems, to witness lives lived without the crushing weight of communal discipline. Such experiences, it was believed, could corrupt a Spartan citizen, making them question the sacrifices and hardships that define their existence. A Spartan who had seen the vibrant markets of Corinth or the intellectual debates of Athens might return home with unsettling thoughts, with desires for personal freedom or material comfort that were anathema to the Spartan ideal. The rationale behind this extreme xenophobia was multifaceted. Foremost was the absolute necessity of maintaining internal order, particularly in the face of the vast, restive Helot population. Any external influence, any outside power, could potentially stir up discontent among the Helots, offering them hope of rebellion or aid from beyond Sparta's borders. The city lived in a perpetual state of vigilance against this ever-present threat, and closing itself off was seen as a vital defense mechanism, ensuring that no outside agitator could whisper promises of freedom into a slave's ear. Furthermore, the Spartans believed that their unique way of life, their thuphosynty, was fragile and easily corrupted. Their system of rigorous training, communal living, and suppression of individualism required constant reinforcement. New ideas, especially those promoting democracy, philosophy, or artistic expression, were viewed not as enlightenment but as dangerous distractions, threatening to divert citizens from their singular purpose, war and the defense of the state. They sought to preserve an idealized, static version of their society, frozen in time, impervious to the currents of change that swept through the rest of the Greek world. The consequences of this isolation, while initially contributing to Sparta's unparalleled military prowess and internal cohesion, ultimately led to its stagnation and decline. While other city-states embraced new technologies, developed sophisticated economic systems, and engaged in vibrant intellectual discourse, Sparta remained stubbornly unchanging. Their refusal to adapt, to incorporate new ideas, to engage with the evolving political and military landscape of Greece, left them increasingly out of step with the times. They missed out on intellectual advancements, on new forms of warfare, and on the diplomatic flexibility that often came with broader cultural understanding. Imagine the lack of innovation, no new architectural styles, no groundbreaking plays, no philosophical schools debating the nature of the universe. The Spartan mind, while honed for battle and obedience, was deliberately denied the fertile ground of diverse thought. This intellectual and cultural sterility, a direct consequence of their xenophobia, meant that when the world changed, Sparta found itself ill-equipped to respond. The fear of outsiders, though born from a desire for self-preservation and the maintenance of their distinct way of life, became a gilded cage. It preserved their ancient customs, yes, but at the cost of adaptability, growth, and eventually their preeminence. Sparta, in its resolute defense against perceived external threats, ultimately became its own prisoner, locked within the rigid confines of its unwavering traditions and its profound, unyielding fear of the unknown. The echoes of a city defined by its walls of human courage also resonated with the quiet, unsettling silence of a society that deliberately shut itself off from the vibrant, ever-changing symphony of the ancient world. The veil of night falls over the Laconian plain, thick and absolute, a canvas for whispered fears. Within the Spartan system, a shadow organization existed, a whispered name, Fort Gynecia. It was arguably the darkest secret within their disciplined society, a chilling test and a brutal instrument of control. Imagine, if you will, the stillness of the midnight air, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl, or the gentle rustling of dry leaves carried on a phantom breeze. This was the arena for the chosen few. These were not ordinary young men, not merely cadets emerging from the rigorous training of the Agoge. They were the elite of the elite, handpicked for their cunning, their stealth, their physical prowess pushed to its absolute limit, and a certain ruthless detachment. They embodied the Spartan ideal of the warrior, but in a form honed for unseen combat, for the shadows rather than the sunlit battlefield. At a tender age, perhaps barely past their mid-teens, these young warriors would vanish from their communal barracks, slipping away under the cloak of deepest night. They were sent into the very heart of the Spartan countryside, the land tilled and tended by the helots, the subjugated population whose very existence was the bedrock and the constant threat to Spartan society. Their mission was twofold, both a crucible for themselves and a silent terror for those they watched over. For weeks, sometimes months, these youths would live like phantoms, like beasts in the wilderness. Their supplies were minimal, their existence solitary and harsh. They learned to forage for berries and roots, to hunt small game in the moonless expanse, to drink from secret springs, and to endure the biting cold of the winter nights or the oppressive heat of the summer sun without complaint. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every distant bark of a dog, every faint flicker of a distant fire became a clue, a potential threat, or an opportunity. Their senses, already sharpened by years of Agoge training, became hyper, attuned to the nuances of the natural world and to the subtle rhythms of the human settlements they observed. They melted into the landscape, becoming as much a part of the shadows as the trees themselves. The true, grim purpose of the Cryptia, however, lay in its second objective, the systematic suppression of the Helot population. Under the cover of darkness, these young Spartans became silent hunters, their prey not wild animals, but their own enslaved neighbors. They were specifically tasked with identifying and eliminating those helots who appeared most robust, most charismatic, or most likely to inspire rebellion. A strong physique, a confident demeanor, an apparent ability to lead Fuide. These were not virtues in a helot, but dangerous markers in the eyes of a Spartan overlord. The Cryptia would observe, stalk, and then, with swift, brutal efficiency, strike. The attacks were always cloaked in secrecy, designed to leave little trace, sowing widespread fear and uncertainty rather than open confrontation. Imagine the psychological torment this inflicted upon the Helots. Every creak of a door at night, every shadow that moved unexpectedly, every unexplained disappearance of a neighbor contributed to an atmosphere of pervasive dread. The Cryptia was not a force to be reasoned with, or even to be seen. It was an unseen hand, a silent judgment that could fall upon anyone, at any time, for reasons opaque and terrifying. It was a constant, chilling reminder of the Spartans' absolute power and the futility of resistance. This constant, quiet reign of terror was arguably as effective as any battlefield victory in maintaining order over a population that vastly outnumbered their masters. And for the young Spartans themselves, what was the cost? This experience was the ultimate test of their Agoge training, pushing them beyond mere discipline into a realm of cold, calculated survival and extreme violence. It forged them into individuals capable of operating independently, making life or death decisions in isolation, and executing brutal acts without flinching. It stripped away any lingering softness, hardening their resolve and instilling a profound understanding of the ruthless realities of maintaining their unique social order. They returned to their barracks, often unnoticed, carrying not only the scars of the wilderness but the deeper, unseen marks of their secret deeds. The Cryptia was a chilling testament to the lengths Sparta would go to preserve its way of life, an almost mythic entity of shadows and terror, a whispered secret that ensured their dominance, one silent, desperate night at a time. The distant howls of wild dogs carried on the wind, a mournful, fitting soundtrack to these hidden patrols, a reminder that within the heart of the disciplined city, there always existed a wilder, more brutal edge. Yet, despite this stark military focus, the Spartans were not, as is sometimes imagined, a cultural desert devoid of finer sensibilities. Indeed, they placed a remarkably high value on music, though their appreciation was uniquely tailored to their societal needs. Their music was not for frivolous entertainment, not for the delicate harmonies of a leisurely evening, but rather a robust and purposeful companion, designed primarily for the grim business of war. The very cadence of their lives, from the structured drills of the Agoge to the slow, deliberate march to battle, was steeped in rhythmic purpose. Imagine standing on a dusty plain, the heat of the Peloponnesian sun beating down upon you, the air thick with anticipation, and the distant murmur of an enemy host. Suddenly, a sound begins to emerge from the Spartan ranks, not a frenzied war cry, but something far more chilling. The steady, almost hypnotic drone of the yolos, a double reed flute. This was their instrument of choice for the battlefield, its reedy, somewhat mournful tone cutting through the quiet tension of the pre-battle atmosphere. It was a sound that, to the Spartans, was as essential as their shields and spears. As the aulos played slowly, deliberately, the Spartan phalanx would begin its advance, each step perfectly synchronized, thousands of bronze-clad warriors moving as one, their large circular shields, forming an impenetrable wall. The music dictated their pace, a measured, unwavering rhythm that instilled an almost trance-like focus. There was no hurried rush, no panic charge. Instead, it was a calm, inexorable progression, a human tide flowing towards its inevitable collision. The steady beat of the flutes served to keep their formation tight, ensuring that the formidable shield wall remained unbroken, and that no man outpaced his comrade, leaving a dangerous gap. For the Spartans themselves, this martial music was more than just a means to keep time. It was the psychological anchor. In the face of impending death, the familiar disciplined rhythms served to calm their nerves, to quiet the primal urge of fear. It transformed individual anxieties into a collective, rhythmic determination. It reinforced their unity, their identity as a single, unyielding entity. Each note, each steady step was a reaffirmation of their training, their discipline, and their shared purpose. It was a sonic heartbeat for the entire phalanx, ensuring that their collective spirit remained as unbroken as their shield wall. But the effect of this calm, ordered marching music on their enemies was arguably even more profound and terrifying. Imagine being on the opposing side, preparing for a battle against the legendary Spartans. You would expect a cacophony of war drums, fierce shouts, and blood-curdling battle cries. Instead, you hear this quiet, methodical flute music, a sound of almost serene precision. There are no frantic displays of bravado, no outward signs of emotional turmoil. Just the steady, unwavering thrum of the yolos, accompanying the relentless advance of an unshakable silent force. This absence of conventional aggression, this chilling display of utter self-control would have been deeply unsettling. It suggested an enemy so devoid of fear, so confident in their own discipline and prowess, that they could march to their doom with the composure of a solemn procession. It stripped away the enemy's own pre-battle bravado, replacing it with a creeping sense of dread. The Spartans were not merely fighting. They were enacting a ritual, a destined encounter that their music seemed to both predict and control. This calm, ordered marching music was thus not just a tool for internal cohesion. It was a potent psychological weapon, eroding the morale of their opponents before the first spear was even thrown, leaving them to face a foe who seemed impervious to the very chaos of war itself. The lingering notes of the flute, long after the battle had begun, would surely have haunted the minds of those who faced them, a stark reminder of an opponent unlike any other. In a society forged in iron discipline and laconic brevity, humor might seem an unlikely companion. Yet, the Spartans, living under such extreme and constant pressures, developed a unique and often dark form of wit. Their humor was not the jovial, boisterous laughter of a feast, but rather a sharp, cutting, and often quite chilling display of verbal economy and understated menace. It was a reflection of their very character, concise, impactful, and always carrying a hidden edge. This style of speech, so emblematic of their region of Laconia, gave birth to the term laconic, a word we still use today to describe a manner of speaking that uses few words but packs a powerful punch. Their wit was born of a life lived on the brink, a coping mechanism as much as an art form. It was a way to assert dominance, to challenge an opponent, or simply to express their stoic indifference to hardship and danger. It was never wasted, never frivolous. Each phrase was a polished weapon, honed by years of training where every unnecessary word was purged. Consider a famous anecdote that perfectly encapsulates this Spartan dry wit. Imagine a foreign visitor, perhaps a merchant or a diplomat from a more opulent city-state, standing before a Spartan warrior. This foreigner, accustomed to the longer, more ornate swords of other Greek armies, might have looked down with a subtle sneer at the relatively short fosi, the double-edged, straight sword that was the hallmark of Spartan close-quarters combat. Perhaps with a patronizing tone or a dismissive gesture, the outsider might have remarked, "Your swords are so short, aren't they?" implying a certain inadequacy, a lack of power compared to the longer blades he was familiar with. The Spartan, in turn, would not have exploded in anger, nor offered a lengthy philosophical defense of their weapon's design. There would be no flurry of words, no emotional outburst. Instead, with an unblinking gaze and a calm, deliberate tone, he might have replied with just a handful of words, utterly devastating in their simplicity. But it is long enough to reach your heart. This retort is a masterpiece of laconic humor and psychological warfare. On a literal level, it was entirely true. The sifa-snifa-sin, though short, was incredibly effective in the tightly packed phalanx, designed for thrusting and close-range combat, capable of delivering a fatal blow to the vital organs. But its true power lay in its psychological impact. The Spartans' response immediately shifted the focus from the weapon's physical length to its deadly efficacy. It was not about how long the sword was, but where it could go. More profoundly, it was a declaration of Spartan values. They prioritized function over form, lethality over ostentatious display. It also carried an implicit threat, delivered with such cool confidence that it would likely send a shiver down the spine of the interrogator. The calm delivery of such a chilling statement conveyed a profound lack of fear, a familiarity with death, and an almost casual acceptance of its inevitability. It wasn't a joke designed to elicit laughter, but to command silence, to instill a sudden, uncomfortable realization of the Spartans' unyielding resolve and their martial prowess. This type of wit was not limited to encounters with foreigners. It permeated their entire culture. When Philip II of Macedon, known for his military might, sent a message threatening, "If I invade Laconia, I will raze Sparta to the ground," the Spartan reply famously was just one word. If, again, the brevity, the understated challenge, the defiant confidence. It was a reflection of a people who met every challenge, every threat, every hardship, with a concise, unwavering defiance. Their dark humor was a shield and a spear in itself, a testament to their resilience, their stoicism, and their quiet, ever-present menace. The echo of such words, delivered with calm certainty, would surely linger long in the memory, a testament to a people who mastered not only the art of war, but also the art of the perfect, chilling retort. The roots of Sparta's eventual twilight, a fading that would prove more insidious than any battlefield defeat, were not planted by an enemy's spear, but rather woven into the very fabric of its existence. It was a slow, inexorable process, a subtle, internal erosion that proved far more devastating than any external siege. The famed Spartan military machine, so meticulously crafted for unparalleled efficiency, contained within its own design the seeds of its ultimate unraveling. Imagine, if you will, the intricate, demanding journey required to become a funiosi, a full Spartan citizen, an equal. From the tender age of 7, a boy was plunged into the unforgiving crucible of the Agoge, a system designed to strip away all softness, all individuality, molding him into the perfect warrior. He endured hunger, cold, brutal discipline, and the relentless pressure to excel, to survive. Only the strongest, the most cunning, the most resilient, emerged from this trial by fire as a worthy part of the Spartan citizen body. This extreme selectivity, while producing arguably the finest soldiers the world had ever seen, inherently restricted the pool of eligible citizens. Each warrior was a monument of human engineering, a lifetime's investment, and therefore an irreplaceable asset. And yet, this intensely honed force was constantly engaged in conflict. Sparta's very existence was predicated on maintaining dominance over its enslaved population, the helots, a numerical imbalance that demanded perpetual military readiness and frequent skirmishes. Beyond these internal pressures, Sparta was frequently drawn into the wider tapestry of Greek politics, engaging in numerous conflicts against rival cities. States in Argos, Athens, Thebes, Forty, and enduring the monumental clash with the Persian Empire. Each engagement, whether a grand victory or a hard-won stalemate, exacted a toll. For every Spartan who fell on the battlefield, a gap was created in the ranks of the Thudi homoioi, a void that was exceedingly difficult to fill. The process of forging a Spartan citizen was too long, too arduous, too exclusive to keep pace with the grim mathematics of war casualties. Visualize the somber processions after a battle, the solemn return of those shields, perhaps bearing the fallen. Each lost life wasn't just a number. It was a decades, long investment in rigorous training, a cornerstone of the phalanx, a voice in the assembly, a father, a husband, a son. The continuous attrition, battle after battle, generation after generation, slowly but surely bled the citizen body dry. The pool of eligible, full-fledged Spartans dwindled, like a slow leak from a meticulously constructed vessel. Paradoxically, even the vaunted iron currency, intended to prevent the accumulation of wealth and foster a spirit of austere equality, couldn't entirely curb the human tendency towards economic disparity. While the concept of cumbersome iron bars as legal tender made large-scale personal enrichment impractical, the Spartans' land ownership policies were not immune to change. Over time, particularly as a result of wills, dowries, and the vagaries of fortune, land began to concentrate in fewer hands. since participation in the syssitia, the communal mess hall city and thus full citizenship, was contingent upon contributing a share of produce from one's land. Those who lost their land or whose land became unproductive found themselves unable to meet their obligations. Imagine the quiet despair of a Spartan man, perhaps a veteran, who through no fault of his own, or through a series of unfortunate circumstances, could no longer provide his share for the communal meal. He would be relegated to the thordy hypomianes, the inferiors, stripped of his political rights, his status as an equal revoked. This wasn't a sudden violent revolution, it was a gradual systemic exclusion. Each instance was a quiet tragedy, another crack in the edifice of Spartan society, another warrior lost not to a spear, but to economic disenfranchisement. The very system designed to foster unwavering military prowess inadvertently created an internal mechanism for its own demographic decline. So, the once formidable military machine, celebrated for its invincible discipline and unwavering courage, gradually found itself lacking the very parts that made it function. The number of soothe homoioi, the full citizen warriors, the bedrock of Spartan power, steadily decreased generation after generation. It is like watching a majestic, powerful river slowly dwindle to a trickle, not through a sudden drought, but through a multitude of subtle diversions, each imperceptible on its own, but collectively leading to an undeniable decline. The system that forged the greatest warriors ultimately consumed itself, proving that even the most rigid and effective structures can harbor the seeds of their own quiet demise. The myth of Spartan invincibility, a psychological bulwark that had intimidated rivals across the Hellenic world for centuries, was not to be shattered by a gradual erosion, but by a single, brutal and utterly unexpected blow on a sun-drenched field in Boeotia. For generations, the name Sparta had conjured images of an unyielding phalanx, a wall of bronze and courage that no enemy could hope to breach. This perception, almost as much as their actual military might, had been a cornerstone of their hegemony in Greece. But that foundation of awe and fear was about to be irrevocably cracked. Close your eyes and let your mind drift to the year 371 BC, to the plains near the small town of Leuctra. The setting sun casts long shadows over two formidable armies arrayed for battle. On one side, the Spartans, confident, disciplined, the very embodiment of military tradition. On the other, the Thebans, under the brilliant and audacious leadership of Epaminondas, a man who dared to challenge the established order of warfare. For centuries, Greek hoplite battles had largely followed a predictable pattern. Two phalanxes, roughly equal in depth and length, would meet head on pushing and shoving in a brutal test of strength and endurance. The strongest hoplites, and crucially, the most prestigious commanders, traditionally held the right flank, considered the position of honor and greatest offensive punch. The Spartans, as was their custom, had deployed their elite troops on their right, expecting to roll up the opposing left flank as they had so many times before. But Epaminondas had a different vision. He wasn't playing by the old rules. Instead of an even line, he created something truly revolutionary: the oblique phalanx. Imagine a diagonal, almost wedge-like formation. Instead of a straight wall, he took his most elite troops, the legendary sacred band and the bulk of his hoplites, and massed them on his left flank, directly opposite the Spartan right. He deepened this section of his phalanx to an astonishing 50 ranks deep 30, a crushing, irresistible force designed to punch through any opposition. Meanwhile, the rest of his line was deliberately thinned, kept back, almost refusing to engage, serving merely as a pivot. Feel the tension in the air as the two armies advance. The rhythmic beat of the drums, the shouts of the officers, the glint of bronze under the midday sun. The Spartans moving with their customary, almost serene confidence, prepare for the familiar clash. They see the Theban left flank, thick and menacing. But they are Spartans. They have faced superior numbers before. Then comes the impact. It is not the usual grinding, symmetrical clash. The Theban left, a battering ram of 50 ranks, hits the Spartan right with an unimaginable force. Imagine the sound, the thunder of shields meeting, the splintering of wood, the clash of bronze, the guttural roars and the screams of men. The Spartan right, usually the unstoppable hammer, finds itself not just fighting, but being fervently crushed. The sheer weight and momentum of the deep Theban formation drives through their lines, disrupting their famed discipline, breaking their formation. Meanwhile, the rest of the Theban line holds back, preventing the numerically superior Spartan line from enveloping their weakened flank. It is a ballet of brute force and tactical genius. The Spartan right, the heart of their army, begins to buckle. Warriors trained from childhood to never yield find themselves overwhelmed, unable to maintain their cohesion. And then the unthinkable happens. Cleombrotus I, one of Sparta's 2 kings, leading his men from the front as was his duty, falls. He is killed in the thick of the fighting, a monumental loss, not just of a leader, but of a symbol. The loss of a king in battle was a deep wound, but the loss of so many Thodihomioi, so many full Spartan citizens, in a single decisive engagement was truly catastrophic. The casualties were immense, not just in terms of numbers, but in the quality of the men lost fighting, the very elites of their society, those who had passed through the Agoge, the irreplaceable parts of their war machine. The Spartan phalanx, for the first time in living memory, broke. It was a rout, a shocking, utterly demoralizing defeat. The invincible myth was shattered, not just for the Thebans, but for all of Greece. The shock waves of Lectra reverberated across the Hellenic world. Sparta, the supreme land power, had been decisively beaten, and its aura of invincibility, that intangible psychological weapon, was gone forever. It marked not just the end of Spartan hegemony, but a profound shift in the very nature of Greek warfare. The old order had been challenged, and a new, more dynamic era of military strategy had begun, leaving the once unassailable Spartans grappling with the profound psychological and demographic fallout of their unbeatable myth being utterly, tragically undone. As the sun sets on the classical age and the Roman legions begin to cast their long shadows across the Mediterranean, Sparta, once the undisputed titan of the Greek world, found itself in a rather curious and melancholic state. By the time Rome exerted its dominance over Greece, the fiery spirit of Leonidas and the iron discipline of the Agoge had long since cooled into embers. The city that had once defied empires and humbled rivals was now a mere shadow of its former self, its citizen population a fraction of what it had been, its military power a distant memory. Yet, a strange reverence, a romantic fascination lingered. The Romans, with their own deep-seated admiration for martial prowess, discipline, and the idealized virtus of their ancestors, were captivated by the legends of old Sparta. They devoured the tales of Thermopylae, the stoic courage, the brutal training, the unyielding ethos. For a society that valued military strength and civic duty, Sparta represented an almost mythical archetype, a pure embodiment of the warrior ideal. So instead of raking Sparta into dust, or thoroughly integrating it into their vast empire like other conquered territories, the Romans chose a peculiar path. They essentially preserved Sparta, transforming it into a kind of living historical museum, a relic of a glorious, albeit brutal, past. Imagine, if you will, wealthy Roman tourists, perhaps a senator or a prosperous merchant, making the long journey to the Peloponnese. They would travel with a sense of anticipation, eager to witness firsthand the vestiges of this legendary city-state. Their destination was not a bustling metropolis, but a place deliberately frozen in time, designed to cater to their exotic curiosity. They came not to trade or conquer, but to observe, to touch the remnants of a world that had once been formidable. What they encountered, however, was less a vibrant city and more a carefully staged performance. The legendary Agoge, the brutal training regimen that had forged generations of Spartan warriors, was no longer a grim necessity for survival. Instead, it became a theatrical spectacle, a reenactment of past glories for the amusement of foreign visitors. The most famous of these performances was the Fouthiae Mastagosis, the public whipping ritual at the altar of Artemis Orthia. Picture a young Spartan boy, perhaps descended from a proud lineage, but now living in a world utterly transformed, enduring the lash, his face a mask of carefully cultivated stoicism, and around him a crowd of wealthy Romans, their faces a mixture of awe, horror, and perhaps a touch of morbid fascination. They would watch with keen interest, marveling at the endurance, perhaps debating amongst themselves whether such barbaric displays truly enhanced a boy's character. For these Roman tourists, it was a glimpse into an alien, yet strangely admirable, culture thirty a chance to see, if only in simulation, the raw, unvarnished discipline that had once made Sparta so fearsome. This was the ultimate irony of Sparta's decline, a society that had so fiercely guarded its independence, its unique way of life, its xenolasia, or expulsion of foreigners, was now reduced to a curiosity, an exotic theme park for its conquerors. The very rituals designed to harden boys into unyielding warriors became a form of entertainment, a spectacle performed for the pleasure of those whose empire had eclipsed others. So, when you consider Sparta in its twilight years under Roman rule, try to picture this strange, almost poignant scene, the echo of ancient glory, the faint scent of fear and awe, juxtaposed with the detached gaze of a Roman tourist, perhaps sipping local wine, watching a staged ritual that once embodied the very soul of a city. It's a powerful reminder of how history can transform, how the fearsome can become fascinating, and how even the proudest civilizations can eventually find their final resting place as an exhibit in the grand museum of time. And now, as the ancient shadows lengthen and the moon begins its slow ascent over the rugged hills of Laconia, we turn our attention to how these remarkable, and at times perplexing, Spartans continue to echo in our own modern world. Our words, you see, are often far older than we imagine, carrying whispers from forgotten times. And when we speak of Sparta, we often unknowingly invoke their spirit even today. Consider, for a moment, the word Spartan itself. When you describe a room as Spartan, what images does that conjure in your mind's eye? Perhaps it is a space stripped bare of all excess, devoid of ornamentation, a stark simplicity that speaks of necessity rather than indulgence. A single cot, a plain wooden table, a clear space on the floor. No frivolous trinkets, no cushioned comfort, no soft textiles that invite lingering. It is a description that immediately evokes a sense of austerity, a deliberate choice to live without the trappings of luxury, a quiet rejection of materialism. This is precisely the essence of the ancient Spartan way of life, a philosophy woven into the very fabric of their society, where lavish possessions were scorned and personal comfort was secondary to the needs of the collective. Imagine, for a moment, the feel of a Spartan home, not a place of warmth and plushness, but of sturdy, functional design. Walls that offered shelter, but little more. Furnishings that served their purpose without fuss or fanfare. Each object chosen not for its beauty, but for its utility. This is the enduring image that the word Spartan grants us. A life distilled to its essentials, a quiet strength found in relinquishing the superficial. And this quality, this embrace of the bare minimum, this focus on the functional resonates even now. When we speak of a Spartan diet, we understand it to mean food that is plain, perhaps even meager, designed to sustain rather than to delight. A meal without rich sauces or exotic spices, just the sustenance needed to fuel the body for its daily tasks. It speaks of a fundamental pragmatism, a clear-eyed understanding of what truly matters, and a profound disinterest in anything that might distract from the pursuit of a higher purpose. Be it physical prowess, mental clarity, or simply enduring hardship, the word itself becomes a bridge across millennia, allowing us to glimpse, however briefly, the values that shaped an entire civilization. Then there is another word, perhaps even more intrinsically tied to the Spartans, Laconic. This term, derived directly from Laconia, the region where Sparta was located, describes a style of speech characterized by extreme brevity and conciseness. To be laconic is to speak with an economy of words, to get straight to the point, to convey a maximum of meaning with a minimum of fuss. It is a verbal discipline, a rejection of rhetorical flourishes and verbose explanations. Think back to the anecdote of King Philip II of Macedon, threatening to lay waste to Sparta. The Spartan response was not a lengthy treaty, not an impassioned plea, but a single defiant word. If a perfect example of laconic wit, sharp as a spear point, cutting through the bluster with an understated power that spoke volumes. Imagine the quiet confidence behind such a response. The complete absence of fear, the unwavering certainty in their own strength and their city's impregnability. It wasn't merely rudeness. It was a carefully cultivated art form, a way of communicating their resolve without wasting precious breath. This tradition of concise communication seeped into every aspect of their public and private lives. One can almost picture the hushed council meetings, where decisions were made with brisk efficiency, each speaker choosing their words with the precision of an archer hitting a distant target. There was no room for ambiguity, no tolerance for rambling. Truth was delivered unvarnished, consequences stated plainly. This laconic style contrasts sharply with the eloquent, often lengthy speeches championed by their Athenian rivals, who reveled in rhetoric and philosophical discourse. The Spartans, it seems, understood that true power lay not in the multitude of words, but in their precise impact. A single, well-chosen phrase could carry the weight of an army, the conviction of an entire people. And so, even today, when we admire someone's ability to express profound ideas with elegant simplicity, when we praise a message for its impactful brevity, we are, consciously or not, honoring the linguistic legacy of those ancient warriors from Laconia. We are acknowledging that sometimes the most powerful statements are not those that shout the loudest, but those that resonate with a quiet, undeniable authority. The laconic mind therefore becomes a template for clarity and directness, a way of thinking and speaking that cuts through noise and focuses on the essential. These words, Spartan and Laconic, are more than mere descriptors. They are echoes, gentle ripples across time, carrying the very essence of a civilization that valued strength, discipline, and an unyielding resolve above all else. They allow us to touch, however faintly, the spirit of a people who carved their indelible mark not just on history, but on the very language we speak. And as these words drift into the stillness, let their meaning settle like dust and motes in the soft glow of a dying fire, a quiet testament to an enduring legacy. Now, let us consider another profound aspect of Sparta, one that sets it apart in a truly astonishing way from nearly every other civilization of its time, and indeed from many even today. It speaks to a deep, almost spiritual, trust in their own strength and an unparalleled defiance of conventional wisdom. They never built walls, not in the way other cities did, at least. Imagine, for a moment, the bustling cities of ancient Greece or the grand metropolises of the Near East. Babylon, Athens, Mycenae, each defined by towering fortifications, massive stone structures designed to repel invaders, to provide a tangible boundary between safety and peril. Walls were the ultimate symbol of a city's security, its wealth, its very existence. They were monuments of fear, erected against the unknown, against the marauding armies that were a constant threat in the ancient world. The construction of these walls was an enormous undertaking, requiring vast resources, immense labor, and sophisticated engineering. They were the first line of defense, a physical manifestation of a community's will to survive. But Sparta defied this fundamental architectural principle for centuries. For a city so utterly dedicated to military prowess, and this absence of conventional fortifications is startling. It forces us to ask, what kind of confidence, what depth of conviction would lead an entire society to forgo such an obvious and universal safeguard? The answer lies in their unwavering belief in themselves, in their training, in the iron will of their citizens. The Spartans famously declared that their walls were not made of brick and mortar, but of the chests of their warriors and the strength of their shields. A poetic and powerful assertion, yes, but also a stark statement of fact. Their defense was not static, it was dynamic. It lived and breathed in every Spartan citizen, from the moment a boy began his Agoge at 7 years old, to the seasoned warrior standing firm in the phalanx. Close your eyes for a moment and try to visualize this. A city without physical barriers, no grand gates to open and close, no high ramparts from which archers could rain down arrows. Instead, picture the sprawling fields, the scattered settlements, and the quiet, unwavering presence of a people who were themselves the living embodiment of their city's protection. The air around Sparta might have felt different, lighter, perhaps, without the heavy press of stone walls. There was no illusion of safety behind concrete. Safety was earned every single day through relentless discipline and an unshakable commitment to their collective strength. This philosophy permeated everything. It meant that every man, every boy was a potential guardian, a living brick in the invisible wall that protected their homeland. It meant that fear was not outsourced to inanimate objects, but confronted and mastered within the individual. Their pride was not in the height of their walls, but in the height of their courage. Their security was not in the thickness of stone, but in the unyielding resolve of their hearts. And what a powerful message this sent to their neighbors and their enemies. To look upon Sparta was to see a city that dared to stand exposed, confident in its human shield. It projected an image of invincible strength, a people so formidable that they needed no artificial barriers. It was an act of profound psychological warfare, a silent declaration that their spirit was their fortress, their discipline their unbreachable gate. Of course, as the centuries wore on and their power waned, as the political landscape shifted and their numbers dwindled, even Sparta eventually succumbed to the need for physical defenses. But for the vast majority of their golden age, their refusal to build walls stands as a monumental testament to their unique worldview. It highlights their absolute dedication to human excellence, their belief that the greatest protection lies not in what you build around you, but in what you forge within you. It's a quiet lesson in self-reliance and internal strength, a reminder that true security often comes from cultivating an unshakable spirit rather than relying solely on external defenses. Let this image of the unwalled city, protected by the very breath and spirit of its people, gently guide your thoughts now, as the night deepens around you. Feel the quiet confidence that radiates from such a belief, a deep trust in the inherent strength of the human spirit when united by a common purpose. And so, we arrive at the very heart of the Spartan story, a narrative that is as complex as it is compelling, ultimately speaking to the enduring human condition. Sparta, a city-state sculpted by an uncompromising vision, found its strength, its very identity, in an almost unimaginable degree of discipline. From the moment of birth, when an infant's worth was evaluated, to the lifelong journey through the Agoge, every facet of a Spartan's existence was meticulously engineered towards a single overarching goal: to create the perfect warrior, the unwavering protector of the collective. It was a society where personal desires were meticulously sublimated to the needs of the state, where individual ambition was reshaped into collective purpose. Imagine the sheer force of will required to live such a life. Every day, from childhood well into adulthood, a Spartan was subject to a regimen designed to strip away weakness, to instill resilience, to forge an iron will. The relentless training, the meager rations, the constant trials of endurance, the lessons in cunning and stoicism, all of it contributed to a collective strength that was truly awe-inspiring. They were, without doubt, the most formidable warriors of the ancient world. Their phalanx an almost unbreachable tide of bronze and resolve. Their very name became synonymous with courage, with an unyielding determination to fight to the last breath. The stories of Thermopylae, of the 300, are not just tales of battle. They are epics of the human spirit pushed to its absolute limits, finding a transcendent power in unity and sacrifice. Their strength was born from a fierce, almost brutal, commitment to a shared ideal. But here lies the profound paradox, the quiet tragedy woven into the very fabric of their greatness. The system that granted them unparalleled power, the discipline that made them invincible, also became their most unyielding cage. The very strictures that forged their strength ultimately limited their adaptability, their capacity for change. Imagine for a moment the weight of such a perfectly engineered society. Every deviation, every new idea, every external influence was seen as a potential threat to the delicate balance they had so painstakingly established. Their legendary insularity, their fear of foreign ideas and luxurious temptations, while designed to protect their unique way of life, ultimately stifled their growth. They became, in essence, prisoners of their own perfection. The Agoge, while producing peerless warriors, did not cultivate philosophers, artists, or innovators in the same measure. Their rigid adherence to tradition, while providing stability, prevented them from evolving with the changing world around them. As the numbers of qualified citizens dwindled due to constant warfare and their own stringent criteria for citizenship, the once mighty Spartan machine began to falter, starved of its essential components. The very qualities that had made them so resilient also made them brittle, unable to bend without breaking. And so, their decline, when it came, was not just a military defeat, but a slow, agonizing unraveling of a society that could not adapt to a world that had moved beyond its foundational principles. The invincible warriors, the architects of their own unique civilization, found themselves trapped within the very system they had so meticulously constructed. They were, in the end, both the greatest champions and the eternal captives of their own relentless discipline. As these final thoughts of Sparta settle around you, perhaps you can feel the faint echoes of their triumphs and their quiet struggles. The weight of their choices, the enduring power of their legacy, and the universal truth that even the most formidable strength can harbor a hidden vulnerability. Let the image of their unyielding spirit, their dedication, and their eventual quiet fading become a gentle current in your mind. Now, as the ancient world recedes and the quiet of your own space surrounds you, take a deep, calming breath. Feel the subtle rise and fall of your chest, a gentle rhythm like the slow, steady drumbeat of time itself. Allow your muscles to soften, releasing any lingering tension. Your shoulders relax, your jaw loosens, and your eyelids feel delightfully heavy. As you drift now, let the sounds of my voice become like the distant rustling of leaves in a forgotten forest, or the soft lapping of water against an ancient shore. No need to hold on to any particular thought. Simply let them float by, like clouds across a vast, peaceful sky. Feel the comfort of your bed beneath you supporting you completely. Let go of any worries, any tasks, any thoughts that might try to pull you back to the waking world. You are safe, you are warm, and you are utterly at peace. The stories of old have guided you to this tranquil place. Allow yourself to sink deeper and deeper into this profound calm. With each passing moment, you are closer to a deep and restorative sleep. The whispers of history fade into the gentle hum of the night. Your breath is soft, your mind is quiet, and your body is ready for rest. Drift now into that wonderful, expansive darkness. Let sleep embrace you fully, completely, and utterly. Good night.